Hey there, today I'm talking about how you can get more from frame dies, specifically this Jewel Bloom Mini Slim die set, available now from Crafty Meraki. But many of these ideas will work with any similar frame dies you have. This one comes with 5 little standalone dies that give you even more possibilities. Let's get started. To start, I'm going to make a mini slim card, and in a previous video I showed you one way to cut your cardstock for this size, which gave you some scraps and also a 4 1/4 inch square card base. But not everybody uses that 4 1/4 inch card base, so here's another way. This gives you a mini slim card base as well as a portion that you can cut the mini slim panel from, as well as a couple of scraps for extras, which will work well with this set and its extra dies. Let's go ultra simple for this first one. I've cut the frame from that scrap and I've added the extra flowers and leaves to the bottom to cut as many as possible in one pass. Of course you could cut this from colored cardstock or color this cardstock, and I've got some more colorful options coming up in my other cards, but I'm opting for white on white, which always gives a really clean look. I used liquid glue on the back of the frame, but you could also use double-sided tape or sheets, especially if you're going to cut the extra flowers from that big centerpiece, otherwise it might be a bit of a waste. For my sentiment, I'm using the older birthday slimline tag set, and I'm stacking it up. When you have a white on white card, using dimension is a great way to make sure that you get clear definition. I've also stacked up that scripty little happy from the same set, and now I'm adding some of the round gems. Crafty Meraki is also releasing a whole new line of bling, and I'll talk a bit more about them in a minute. These gems are the sparkle rainbow color, and they're like magic. They seem to change color from pink and yellow to blue and green, depending on which side you're looking at. They come in this adorable case, which looks like a jewel itself, and it can sit on its side like this so you can see all the sparkly goodness. When I'm applying jewels, I like to tip them out into a triangle tray. It allows them to spread out a bit so I can choose the ones I want with my jewel picker. Of course, finding the right position for them is often the most challenging part, but I like to group them in 2s or 3s with different sizes and in triangles, with the groups themselves in a visual triangle if possible. Or I just follow the flower centers and I go with that. When I'm done with the jewels, this triangle tray makes it very easy to tip all the extras back into their container for next time. Next, I'm going to use Copic markers to color the frame. I start by choosing a lighter and darker shade for each color, green, red, and yellow, and I outline the edge with the chisel tip of the darkest green. Next, I'll show you quickly how I colored my red flowers with a light red all over, and then I flicked a darker red from the center out along the petals. Finally, I went back in and I did shorter flicks with a brown marker. This will add a lot of depth to the flower, and the brown will keep that red feeling nice and warm and fall-like. Next, I did a similar thing with the yellow flower, light yellow all over, deep yellow flicked out to the petals, and then a light brown right in the center. When you're coloring with Copics, contrast is what adds the look of dimension, so don't be afraid to skip down those numbers to get to the darker ones, even if you only add a little bit. With the leaves, I kept to 2 colors and I just put the darker one in a line in the middle of each leaf. So after all that work, I'm thinking I'd like to get 2 cards out of this frame. One easy way to do that is to snip it at a spot that makes sense, between the flowers, and then you have 2 partial frames. If you want to make 2 mini slim cards, then trying to snip it as close to half as possible means that each card will get equal amounts of the frame. When I went to glue it on, I noticed that I could see the white edges of the frame, so I just took the chisel tip of that marker and I ran it along the edge. You don't really have to do that for each of the flowers since the background is white. After playing around a bit, I changed my mind and I snipped one of the pieces again, so I could add it back to the left edge of my mini slim card and just have a corner on my square card. This is a great way to be able to use a mini slim die on a different size card and get more out of it, and I'll show you a few more ideas like that in a minute. For my mini slim card, I cut the Thanks Slimline tag sentiment from chocolate cardstock and I glued it on. Then I added some golden illusion gems to the flower center. This time I poured some into the lid. If you don't have a triangle tray, using the lid is a great alternative, although it doesn't have that handy pointy end for tipping them back in, but if you're careful, it works pretty well. For my square card, I added some jewels and then decided it really needed more of the frame. I cut another one from white cardstock and colored just the corner I planned to use. Then I stamped a sentiment I kind of created by combining a sentiment from Birthday Blooms with one from Elegance, and I stamped it in dark brown ink using my Misty. Next, I'm going to show you 2 ways to stretch this set. I wanted an easier, faster way of coloring my frame, so I grabbed a couple of Distress Oxide sprays in red and yellow, but I only have Spring Green in Oxide spray, so I also chose a Nuvo Sparkle spray in a deep olive, which is more fall-like. Now, I'm no spray expert, but I try to move my arm across as I'm spraying so that I get light coverage. If I need to do layers, it's easy to do to get the coverage I want. When I'd finished spraying, I picked up some of the standalone leaves with tweezers to dip them into some of that overspray. Then I set it all aside to dry. The first way to stretch this slimline die is to stretch it. Here's a true slimline panel of brown cardstock, 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. To lengthen this frame, all you need to do is snip it at the same measurement on each side. When you put the frame at the top of the bottom of your panel or card base, there's an empty spot just waiting for a big sentiment strip. I'm going to jazz up my sentiment strip by trimming it with the Thanks Slimline tag, which has scalloped edges. I cut a piece of white cardstock just bigger than I'll need, and I ran it through my machine, and then it's going to fit right in place. The second way I'm stretching this set is to turn the frame into a cover plate, or at least get a look of a cover plate, by adding in those standalone leaves and flowers. This works even if you don't stretch the frame like I did here. Just fill in the space and you'll get that all-over look. I stamped a sentiment on my scallop panel with my Misty and my brown ink, and I used a whiteboard eraser to help. Because of the felt base, it runs smoothly over the Misty door and it gives even pressure. I popped up the sentiment strip with some foam tape, and now to add some gems, again I've got the Golden Illusion gems, and this time I'm putting them into each scallop. The gems come in a mix of sizes, so you can choose the look you want, and I think this size works really well with the scallops. I also added gems to the flower centers to finish it off. Here's some other ideas for adjusting the length of the frame. First, you can shorten it by taking out a chunk of it and putting in a sentiment strip over the join. Since it's 3.5 inches wide, I cut it down to create a framed square, but you could cut out a smaller chunk and do a 3.5 inch by 4 3/4 inch rectangle for an A2 card. Here's another idea. Just use the two long edges as borders on an A2 card, or turn them to be a border around a sentiment strip. You're never limited to just one size with a frame die like this. Next, I've got some cards with ideas to use the standalone dies that are included in the set and pair them with some other dies in your stash. This is a Mini Slim, and I started by blending some autumn colors of ink on the front of it. I masked the back, and I like to do that just past the fold so that the edge of the card is blended as well. I layered my blending with a panel cut from the all-round Mini Slim dies, and you can see that that hides any imperfections in my blending. My sentiment is 3 little words, love, hope, and joy, from the Birthday Blooms set, and I stamped them in the 3 center holes with that dark brown ink. Next, I popped up the larger daisy in each of the holes, just leaving them white for some high contrast. And now I'm choosing colors from the rainbow mixed gems to put on each flower. I managed to get a red, a peachy color for the orange, and some bright yellow gems, but I went back to the Golden Illusion for the light green and emerald for the darker green. Next, another quick way to add some color to these little die-cut leaves and flowers is to do some ink smooshing. To make it even easier, I've put a loop of tape onto an acrylic block, and I added all the little pieces. I started with the leaves and smushed 3 colors of green ink onto my mat before spritzing with water and then smushing the leaves in. Then I moved on to a couple of shades of yellow for the rounder flowers. When you smush like this, you get lots of variation in color, and that gives a look of texture. If you want a more solid look, you can swipe the ink directly onto the die cuts. Next, I did some red and yellow for the daisies, and then I set them all aside to dry. I have enough pieces for a couple of cards. For the first one, I was planning to make a wreath by putting the leaves around the circle, following the curves of the branches, but I changed my mind and I went with this snowflake kind of wreath instead. Once I'd put down the leaves, I added the flowers into the center, and I added some gems to the flower centers and randomly around the leaves. To finish the card, I cut another strip with that scallop tag die just to add some texture and visual interest to my card base, and I glued the wreath on top. I think the white scallops add the perfect pretty touch without distracting from the flower arrangement, and I think in the end this is my favorite card in this bunch. Oh, but wait, look what happened next. I stamped my sentiment and it was crooked. Now, what I should have done was stamped it before I added the dimensional flowers and leaves, and I could have stamped on acetate to make sure it was straight, but I didn't. So I pulled out one of my all-time favorite card-making mistake fixer tools, my Cricut Spatula. This metal spatula is very thin and can easily get between the layers. I had to start with a new card base, and this time I did stamp it before I added the flowers, and I'll keep the misstamped card base in my scraps drawer for die cutting in the future. Now back to my next card. I used the scallop tag again, but this time I created a panel with the scallop only on one side. I made sure it was straight by lining up the points on the other side of the die with the edge of the cardstock before I cut it. I used the same sentiment, but this time I stamped it with embossing ink before sprinkling white embossing powder over it, and then heating it in my foil-lined lid until it was shiny and melted. Then I used the brown panel as my garden, and I planted the flowers in it. I tore off the top leaf on each branch so there was space for the flowers, and I popped up one flower in each arrangement. And then, you guessed it, I added more gems to the centers. This video is part of a hop, and I've got a link to the next video below, as well as a link to my blog where I've got all the hop details. If you enjoy getting more from your crafty tools, here's a playlist filled with clever and fun ideas for doing just that. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.